Okay. Boy, you both look so different.
Mm.
You know, with them and a couple other neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And they, I don't know, they were pictures.
I'm not sure.
Very. Okay.
Long-haired kid.
You know, I mean, at a
Long-haired-
certain point it became fashionable.
Oh, yeah. How old
Bummed
are you?
around Europe for a while, right?
How old are you?
42.
Yeah, you're my brother's age. So yeah, but you just
But-
weren't an avid hippie.
I mean, God, I mean, I lived at home halfway through college.
Mm.
Look around and listen to the music. You can feel.
Oh boy.
I won't fiddle with anything.
And we're ready anytime you want to start.
Okay. Dar, what are your earliest memories of your parents?
Loving,
Now,
Devoted.
okay. Throughout this, just so we, I'll try to ask a good question.
Specific?
No, I'll try to ask a question that'll allow you to talk because as Dan said, if we go back and forth, then the camera's not looking at me, so it'd be. Sometimes I may ask you a question and you may look for a reaction to me, and I will give you a facial reaction, but I won't say anything because it messes up.
okay,
You know, the flow
right.
of the footage. So
okay.
yeah, just but don't feel you can
Yeah.
pause it all because we'll be, you know, he'll be. The nice thing about this is he can edit all this out, you know, later on,
Yeah,
and he can
yeah.
just take the parts that we like. You
Yeah.
know, that's the nice thing about this. So if you want to say something, I don't
I
want
have
to answer
very
that
happy
question.
memories, but you know, you kind of took me off guard.
Okay,
I have
I
to
mean,
think a little bit.
I should no, I should
have to think
okay.
a little bit.
Well, yeah, let me
Yeah. But I can
all
give
right,
you
all
a
right.
better
let me
answer
let me
now.
start. How would you describe your father's personality?
Very much like your father's. Deep, serious, kind, hardworking, devoted, but fun-loving. He really enjoyed life, and he adored my mother. She was 12 years younger than Dad, and she was the queen. She could do no wrong. So it was a very happy atmosphere as a child. We didn't have an awful lot of anything, but we had everything that we needed. We had love and kindness and devotion. And I remember very strongly our summers when we used to go to Asbury Park when Buddy and I were kids. And I remember my dad with the lovely white flannel trousers on and a navy blue jacket and white shoes and a sailor straw hat on, taking us to the boardwalk for the concerts on Sunday nights. We went to hear John McCormick, and then there was a lovely stand on the boardwalk where you could have all the ginger ale or root beer that you wanted for 10 cents, I think. And that was one of the big treats of the night, was to go walking on the boardwalk with Mother and Dad. and enjoy that. And Dad was very serious, as I say, very much like Buddy is, but very, take your splinters out, you know, that sort of thing. He give you the mustard foot bath when you had the croup or anything, and he did everything he could to make life comfortable and beautiful for us kids and for my mother. My mother could do no wrong. She could run into New York and spend the whole day shopping and come bouncing home at about 6 o'clock, and Dad would have the supper started, and when Mommy would walk in, he'd say, "Oh, here's the Ma. Doesn't she look lovely?" And she'd whip in, and Dad would have something started, and he just thought that she was right out of God's pocket. And she was. Everybody adored her, and she got away with murder. So it was a very, very happy time with my mother and father.
What was your father's job?
He was the sales manager and superintendent, general superintendent of the Schroeder Lamp Works in Jersey City, which was a very large, successful company who manufactured the lighting fixtures that were put into the New York Public Library when that was built, the New York subway system, and very creative work, and Dad ran the whole show. He had worked with the older gentleman who owned it from the time that he was a very young man, and when the older gentleman, Mr. Schroeder, died, his son took over, and his son was a party boy, so he was racing with yachts on the Shrewsbury River with Sir Thomas Lipton and his yachts, and so Dad ran the business. And when the young Mr. Schroeder amassed enough money and grew tired of even making out paychecks, he turned the lock in the building and closed it up. And all of the foremen wanted to get together and chip in and buy the company out and have Dad run it. But this young playboy just didn't want to have any part of that. So then that broke my father's heart.
Yeah,
That was when he was only in his early 50s, and that was tough to go from top of the heap to nothing. And
Was that during the Depression?
no, this was prior to the Depression. This was when I was maybe 14 years old, and Buddy was about 16.
Right.
And that's why your dad never went off to college.
Right.
Got a job on Wall Street and went to college at night, because Dad just was unemployable for a number of years, and then he did locate something, but it was not nearly as lucrative as what he had been used to. And
Now,
he was never too happy again.
considering that he was doing pretty well with E.J. Schroeder, I remember my father talking about the Coldwater Flats.
Right.
You still lived a pretty Spartan existence, or was that just the average?
It was average. It was average.
Okay.
It had brass railings, the flat
Okay.
did, and that's something. That was always a big step if the flat had brass railings. And we lived there until I was it was on Hamilton Park. It was a very, very lovely area for middle-income people. And we lived there until I might have been until 1923 or 4. And then Mother and Dad bought the house on the boulevard that we later moved to, and that I spent the later years of my childhood in. But this purchase was made before the rug was pulled out from under Dad's feet. And so it wasn't easy, for my mother and father, but they managed, and we all had everything that was basic and that was important that we really needed.
What would you do in those days for entertainment? Today kids are watching TV and all that. What did you do in your childhood?
You listened to the radio after you finished your homework to one earphone. You had earphones like Dan has on, not quite, but not too unlike them. And Dad had 2 earphones. And when you were finished your homework, you were given one earphone to sit and hold and to listen to Amos and Andy. And we played cards. The family played cards a lot together. And as I say, we had our summer vacations at the shore here. Not the whole summer, but we had a lot to look forward to in the way of family things together.
Who was it? Your grandfather, Martin Purcell, who was superintendent of the streets.
That's right, Grandpa.
Grand.
Grandpa Purcell, and he was a doll. He lived with an uncle just across the park from us, and on Saturdays he was free from his superintending job, and he would come with the horse and carriage and take us and all of our friends from the neighborhood, all the kids on the block, out for rides around the park in his horse and carriage. And his horse's name was Gijap.
A very creative name.
Yes, but that was quite a treat. You know, it was a thrill. All the kids cozied up to you if Grandpa was coming, because they all wanted to do it.
So, is he the only grandparent who you have?
That's right. The
memory
only
of?
grandfather the only grandparent I ever knew.
What did you hear anything about his wife or your father's parents?
I
Anything?
heard very little about my dad's parents. As I say, he was quiet. He was studious. He was self-educated and read a great deal, but he was not too communicative except about family things that involved us. But Grandpa Purcell, my mother's dad, had fathered 10 children, and his wife died when she was 44 and had 10 children, 6 of whom did not live to maturity. The only ones who really did were my mother, Uncle Bill Purcell, Uncle Jim Purcell, and Hummer.
Right.
And they were all very, very close and very devoted, because my mother used to tell me that her mother told them, mentioned it many times, even though my mother was only 16 when she lost Mama, as they called my grandmother, apparently. The only thing that Mother ever told me about Mama was that she used to say to them, "Don't any one of you ever forget that I raised you, I carried you all under the same heart." And they never did forget it. They were there was a strong, strong family bond, and I hope that that has followed on down with all the branches and the members of the family. It's very important to me. I hope I never see that there's any change in that. I don't see any change within my own children. They adore one another, Judy, Hap, and John, and they have such great love for all of you Corcoran kids. There aren't too many of us,
Right.
but has always been a lovely, lovely bonding among us all. And of course, as far as my brother and me, there's nothing else like it. I mean, you'll see in one of the pictures that I have there, Buddy holding my hand when he was 4 and I was 2, and he has held my hand ever since. And then when he brought Ruth into the family, she was the sister I never had. So it's been a beautiful, beautiful life all along. Some of it didn't last as long as we would all hope it would, but it was always quality.
Where did your mother grow up? With the Purcells?
In Jersey City, all in Jersey City. Although Grandpa Purcell was born in Freehold, but then he came up to Jersey City because that's where all the work was. It was a railroad. Jersey City was a railroad terminal. But he had been yardmaster at the was it the Pennsylvania or the Erie Railroad? I don't remember which, but he was top man at the railroad terminal until Uncle Bill Purcell, who was as a very young boy, worked on the trains and had his unfortunate tragedy and lost his limb. And then Pa, as my mother always called him, could not stand working around the trains any longer, and that was when he went to work for the city and got Gijap and took care of, he supervised all the repairs and things like that in the streets. But Mother and all the family lived in what they call the railroad's executives' houses. They were what today you would call brownstones. The railroad owned a whole block of houses in Jersey City that only the executives could live in. They couldn't buy them, but they leased them. and they call them the railroad executives' houses, and they all lived there, and it was very large apparently, and there was a lot of fun there in the family because they all played the piano and they all sang and they all danced and they had a lot of fun. I've heard so many tales about the fun that they had, and everybody came there, and there was a lot of gaiety in my mother's family. About my dad's family, I knew very little.
Yeah, my father said that all he knew was that they came from Brooklyn.
Dad's family.
Yes.
Yes,
Dad's family.
yes,
You're-
that's all I know. That's
Yeah.
all I know, because they were all, his parents were dead before he married Mommy, you know.
Now
before
this,
they were married.
the A.J. Corcoran would have been
Dad's uncle.
Dad's uncle.
Dad's uncle. Yes, his father's brother.
Okay. Did
But-
you ever meet him?
Oh yes, oh we knew Uncle A.J. Uncle A.J. was quite a character in Jersey City. He was very beautifully successful, and he had that little white goatee, and he and Aunt Liza, Bessie, lived on the hill when we still lived downtown in the railroad flat. They lived in a very beautiful home in the Bergen section, and we used to get dressed up and be taken up to visit with Uncle A.J. But he was austere. He was very austere, and he was my father's uncle.
Your father's uncle.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So really, that side of the family we don't know a lot about.
Very
as you
little,
Say that they
as
were
I
from
say.
Brooklyn, and we
Yes.
know that was his uncle.
Originally, they had started out in the blacksmith business before any of them came to Jersey City. Before Uncle A.J. or Dad's father came to Jersey City, they had been blacksmiths in some part of Brooklyn. I don't even know where. Dad said very little about that.
What were your memories of you and my father, playing as kids? Did
Oh.
you have other friends in the neighborhood, or did you?
Well, we were a team, the two of us. He was quiet. I was noisy. And he always took care of me and watched over me. And I do remember that my mother telling me, because somehow or other I managed to get out of school, graduate from school at a very early age. I came out of grammar school at 11, which is ridiculous, and high school at 15. And it's ridiculous, it never should happen that way. But when Buddy went to school, he went to the kindergarten, and the school was only a block away. There were no streets to cross or anything. And when he went to school, I would go around and stand outside of the school and cry for him. He was 5 and I was 3, and I'd cry, "I want Buddy, I want Buddy." So finally they would come out, and to keep me quiet, they would take me in and put me in the kindergarten and let me be there. They'd call my mother and say, "Well, we have Sis here. Don't worry about her." And we had all very, very nice playmates. Doctor's Row was right around the corner from us, and Dr. Sullivan and Dr. Short and Dr. Crowley all lived in those houses, and we played with all of their children, Jack Sullivan and all of them. We had all and living right on the park. The park was a great place, for playing, and there was a bandstand there, and there were concerts. And then, too, I remember during World War I, what had originally been an orphanage just on the other side of the park in back of St. Francis Hospital was turned into a barracks for the servicemen. And we would hear them marching around the park with the 1, 2, 3, 4 at 6 o'clock in the morning. You'd hear them. That was where they drilled before they were sent overseas. And that was quite a thrill to see the young men in uniform. And I remember, too, my mother being very active in Red Cross work during World War I. I remember that she would have the white uniform and with the Red Cross on her cap, and but when she would come home, Dad would be with us in the evening while Mother was out fundraising and doing whatever she could to help the war effort. And I remember in the morning, her clothing that she had had on the night before would always be laid out near an open window because the flu epidemic came along then. And there was so much contagion. The doctors would not come to see anybody, to call on anybody who had the flu if they lived above the first floor. They were too busy. They didn't have time to go up the stairs. And but Mother was helping. She wasn't a trained nurse, but as a nurse's aide, helping during the World War I, and the flu epidemic.
Now, your mom, was she involved with politics, or was the family involved?
The family was always involved in politics. Everybody.
That was the Jim Hay. Who was the Frank Hague?
Frank Hague.
Was he the mayor?
Yeah.
Or
Well, even before he was the
before
mayor.
him, yeah.
Mother and Dad, well, Mother and Grandpa and everybody,
Everybody.
they were all involved in it. Just last weekend, I happened to see a rerun of an old film, a Woodrow Wilson film, and parts of it were filmed right over here in Seagirt at the Army camp where they used to have the summer White House, and it was the story of Woodrow Wilson's life, and it brought back a lot to me because prior to my mother's marriage, she was the secretary in his private law practice to Joe Tumulty, who later became secretary to President Wilson. But he originated in Hudson County. And when Mother finished her secretarial training in school, she got a job working in Joe Tumulty's office, and was very happy there. But then, of course, he went on to Washington with Woodrow Wilson. And one thing that I have regretted to this day is that we had the complete set, or a complete set, of Woodrow Wilson's law library that Joe Tumulty had given to my mother. The yellow leather bound books with the red seal across that you see in all lawyers' offices. And on one of our moves, unfortunately, we tossed them. And they were a set that had belonged to Woodrow Wilson. And when I think of it now, how stupid we were, but the things you do. And Mother was very successful.
So Mother was interested in local politics.
Oh, yes, always, always. And she was very active in the Queen's Daughters Day Nursery, which was a group of devoted and dedicated Catholic women who ran a nursery for the children of working mothers. It started during World War I. And Mary T. Norton, who later became a congresswoman, was one of the charter members, as was my mother. And they took the children of any race and creed in. It didn't matter. But they had all these fundraisers to keep the thing going. And if the parent could afford 10 cents a day, they accepted it. And if the parent could not afford 10 cents a day, it didn't matter. There was no distinction. And they fed them breakfast if the kids hadn't had breakfast, and lunch. And if the parent didn't come for them in time to get supper, they fed them supper. They had matrons there who did the work, but this very dedicated group of women, and Mother was president of that for many, many, many years, and did a terrific job.
Was my father mentioned one other address, 277 8th Street?
That was the brass railing flat.
Oh, that was the one. Okay.
Well, we lived in two brass railing flats until I was about 3.
Okay.
We lived on East Hamilton Place, but then we moved to 277 8th Street, but still facing the park.
Okay. Now, your father's brother Jack and sister Mamie.
Right.
Any memories of them?
Uncle Jack Corcoran he was a dude. He was a bachelor, and he was a dandy dude, very, very flashy, and he never married. And he was always good. If you went over, and he stood on the corner where all the politicians stood and gathered every evening and hashed things over. And it was just around the corner on the park there. And if you went over and said, "Hello, Uncle Jack," he was good for a quarter. And a quarter was a whole lot. Quarter was a whole lot. And Aunt Mamie never married. She was a nurse and the public schools, and she never married. But they are very, very dim in my memory because I was a very little girl at that time. But I remember Uncle Jack always had a quarter.
Now, as far as the Purcells, we talked about Uncle Bill, who had lost his leg.
Yeah.
Jim Purcell, I remember there was a story about the toilet seats. Can you tell us that.
Gee, I had forgotten that. Leave it to Buddy. Uncle Jim every once in a while went on a toot, and Uncle Jim had 3 very fine children, a daughter Marie and a son Dick and a son Jack, and they were fine. They were very fine, nice, older than we were, but Aunt Mary, his wife, used to say that when Uncle Jim would go on a toot, he'd get very energetic when he came home that night after having had a few beers, and he'd always paint the toilet seats, all of them. they lived in a row house that had a couple of levels and a couple of bathrooms, but that was always an unpleasant surprise. That was how she knew that Jim had been out partying the night before.
Now, Uncle Bill, after he lost his leg, did he have another job?
Oh, yes, yeah. Uncle Bill worked for the county, for Hudson County. He was the registrar of vital statistics. He had a very demanding job because he made it so. He was in charge of the whole department. He was the registrar. He signed every birth certificate and every death certificate and handled all of that. And he took most of it he took all of it very conscientiously, because during the war, this goes World War I and World War II, a birth certificate was a very, very valuable piece of evidence for anybody who wanted to come into the country. And he was always fearful that some of the clerks in the office might give out a birth certificate with his name on, with false information, false dates. So he never left signed certificates, which meant that he had to personally see everybody who came in and check the records of some of the clerks who were a little bit not too reliable, I guess. So
Yeah, I guess there were a lot of immigrants coming in. at
oh,
that
of
time.
course there were. Of course there were. And people trying to get in who shouldn't be here, you know.
Yeah.
And he used to worry a great deal about that. But he had a beautiful handwriting, and many people I know will say, well, I see your uncle's signature on my birth certificate. He had the beautiful Spencerian Catholic school script, you know. They all did. He was trained by the Christian Brothers in St. Mary's in Jersey.
You went buddy schools?
Public
Public
school,
school.
because it was in the corner.
Oh, okay.
We didn't have to cross any streets. And it was, I think my parents regarded it on a little better educational level at that time than the Catholic school would have been.